Hey guys, welcome to tonight's story, a gentle tale to ease your mind and guide you into deep, peaceful sleep. Tonight we'll journey through quiet forests, ancient legends, and forgotten magic. It's the story of a young wanderer, a mysterious flame, and a path that will take us far beyond the edges of the known world. So find a cozy spot, close your eyes, and let the fire crackle in the background as we begin. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment if you enjoyed the story. Sweet dreams and good night. Chapter 1. The Whispering Flame. In the farthest corner of the kingdom, where the hills rolled gently into the horizon, and the stars shone just a little brighter at night, there was a small village called Brindlewood. It was a quiet place, the kind where the days moved slowly, and the air always smelled faintly of cedar and old stories. People here lived simple lives. They rose with the sun, tended to their goats and gardens, and gathered by the fireside when evening fell, telling tales passed down from the time before time. And among all those tales, there was one that never failed to stir something deep inside the hearts of those who listened, the tale of the Whispering Flame. It was said that somewhere beyond the mist-covered valleys and the deep, dark woods, there burned a single, eternal flame. It whispered the truth to any soul who dared to find it. Some called it a lantern, others a spirit, and a few claimed it was alive, watching, waiting. Most believed it to be just a story. But not Elion. Elion was a quiet boy of 17 summers. He had the eyes of someone older, wide, thoughtful, always searching for something just beyond the reach of words. He worked as a candlemaker's apprentice, spending his days dipping wax and tying wicks. But in the evenings, when the skies turned purple and the wind carried the smell of pine, he would slip away to the old stone bench by the edge of the forest, where his grandfather once told stories. He missed his grandfather more than he could say. One evening, as the village prepared for the coming of autumn, hanging dried herbs in the windows and lighting lanterns a little earlier than usual, Elion sat at his usual spot, watching the woods. There was a hush in the trees, like they were holding their breath. A soft breeze brushed past him, and with it came a sound, not quite a voice, but something close. A whisper, maybe. A word that melted as soon as it touched his ears. He stood, heart quickening. It was probably just the wind. The wind or the wishful thinking of someone who longed too deeply for something more. But he turned toward the forest anyway, and in that moment, the last light of the sun caught something between the trees, a flicker, small, orange, alive. He blinked, and it was gone. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above his bed, the image of that flicker playing over and over in his mind. His thoughts were soft, like falling leaves. What if the stories were true? What if the flame was real? He rose just before dawn, packed a small satchel with bread, dried pears, and a flask of warm tea. He wrapped his grandfather's old cloak around his shoulders, warm but still smelling faintly of wood smoke. He didn't leave a note. He knew his mother would worry, but she would also understand. She had once chased dreams herself, long ago, before the world taught her not to. As the first light of morning painted the sky in strokes of gold and lavender, Elion stepped past the edge of Brindlewood and into the trees. The path ahead was uncertain, but it called to him all the same. And so began his journey, not with thunder, nor with battle cries, but with a single step into silence, and the memory of a flame that may or may not have been real. But in his heart he knew the story had already started. The forest greeted Elion with a hush that felt ancient. Morning mist curled between the trunks like lazy spirits, and every footstep seemed louder than it should have been, crunching on leaves that had just begun to fall. The trees here were older than the village, tall and thick, their bark dark with time. Moss clung to their roots like soft green memory. Elion walked slowly, careful not to break the silence more than he had to. He followed no real path, only the pull in his chest, and the memory of the flicker he thought he'd seen the night before. As the sun climbed, the mist thinned, and the forest lightened. Birds began to call to one another in sleepy tones, and the world warmed just a little. Elion paused near a fallen tree and shared some of his bread with a small red squirrel that had crept close, nose twitching. "You think I'm foolish, don't you?" he whispered. The squirrel twitched its ears, took the crumb, and disappeared without a sound. By midday, Elion found a creek with clear, cold water. He knelt to drink and caught his reflection in the rippling surface. He looked tired already, the kind of tired that came not from walking, but from carrying questions too long without answers. He sat beside the water for a while, letting the sun dry the dew on his cloak. Insects buzzed softly nearby. Somewhere in the distance a branch cracked. He looked up, heart quickening. "Hello," he called. No answer came. Only the rustle of leaves, as if the trees were exchanging secrets in a language he couldn't understand. He pressed on. Hours passed. The forest thickened. Shadows lengthened. Elion began to feel the weight of solitude settle around him. It wasn't frightening, not yet, just unfamiliar. And then, just as the sky began to turn the color of burned copper, he saw it. A small clearing opened before him, and in the very center stood a single tree, unlike any he had seen before. Its trunk was white as bone, its leaves a deep blue-green that shimmered when the wind touched them. At its base lay a smooth, flat stone, and upon the stone someone had placed a lantern. The lantern was unlit. Elion stepped closer, the air around him suddenly still. No birds, no wind, no sound. The lantern was old, iron-worked, with glass panels etched in spirals and stars. He reached out, but before his fingers could touch it, a voice drifted through the air, low, melodic, and not entirely human. "You seek the flame," it said. Elion turned sharply. Standing just beyond the clearing was a figure cloaked in dark green, face hidden beneath a hood. They held a staff carved with runes that glowed faintly, like coals in a dying fire. I think so," Elion answered. The figure tilted their head. "Many seek, few listen." Elion swallowed. Listen to what? The figure stepped forward. To the silence. To the spaces between words. To the breath of the world. The lantern flickered just once, then went still again. Elion looked from it to the stranger. "Is this the whispering flame?" The figure did not answer. Instead, they turned and began to walk into the trees. "If you wish to know," the voice called back, "follow me. But know this, not all who follow return with what they seek." Elion hesitated only a moment. Then he stepped away from the lantern into the darkening forest once more, following a stranger with fire in their voice and secrets in their step. Chapter 2. The Forest of Speaking Leaves. They walked without speaking. The stranger moved like a shadow between the trees, silent and certain, as though they had walked this path 1,000 times before. Elion followed, eyes wide, ears tuned. to every creak of the branches, every hush of the wind through the leaves. Evening was folding gently into night, and the world was changing with it. The forest around them began to shimmer, not with light, not exactly, but with something older and quieter. The leaves, once still, now swayed without breeze. Elion felt a tingling on the back of his neck, like the trees were watching. Then he heard it, soft as a sigh. A word, maybe two, carried on the wind, not spoken aloud, but somehow pressed into his thoughts like a distant memory. He stopped walking. The stranger turned. "You hear them," they said. Elion nodded slowly. "What are they?" The hooded figure stepped aside, gesturing toward the trees. "This is the forest of speaking leaves. They carry voices from long ago, echoes of those who once passed through." Elion's eyes widened. "They speak to me? Only if they remember your kind, or if you carry pieces of someone they knew." Elion thought of his grandfather, of the stories told by firelight, and the way his voice had dipped low when speaking of old magic. Perhaps the leaves remembered him. Perhaps they whispered for him. They walked on. As they passed beneath a tall elm, Elion caught another whisper, this one clearer. "Elion." He turned sharply. "Did you hear that?" The stranger only smiled. "Not all names are spoken by chance." They came upon a small stream, and beside it a circle of standing stones. Moss grew thick across their surfaces, but faint carvings could still be seen, runes and symbols that stirred something in Elion's chest. He couldn't read them, but they felt familiar, like music hummed long ago. The figure motioned for him to sit. "You carry questions," they said, sitting opposite him on a stone. "Ask one." Elion hesitated. So many questions swirled in his mind, but only one rose to the surface. "Why me?" he asked. The figure reached into their cloak and withdrew a pouch of dried herbs, which they sprinkled onto a small pile of twigs between them. With a snap of their fingers, flames sparked, soft and blue. "Because you listened," they said. "Most people forget how." Elion stared into the blue fire, watching it dance without smoke. "The world is full of voices," the stranger continued. "Not just from people, but from stone, water, shadow, and flame. The whispering flame calls out now because it is needed, and someone must follow." Elion felt the weight of those words settle into him. Not a burden exactly, more like a cloak he hadn't realized he'd always been wearing. They sat in silence for a while, the leaves above rustling with quiet voices. Somewhere in the trees an owl called once and was answered. At length the stranger stood. "You will reach a bridge before dawn," they said. "Do not look back once you cross it. The forest will test your memory." Then they turned, vanishing into the woods as if swallowed by the night itself. Elion sat alone, with the fire dwindling at his feet and the leaves still speaking softly above. He listened, not for answers, but for understanding, and the forest whispered on. The fire had burned down to ash, and the stars had emerged, not sharp and bright, but soft, blurred like candlelight behind misted glass. Elion rose slowly, brushing the moss from his cloak, and stepped once more into the forest. It had changed. The path beneath his feet, if it ever was a path, now seemed alive, not in a threatening way, but with a quiet awareness. Roots twisted in patterns too deliberate to be random. The trees no longer stood apart, but leaned toward each other, branches woven like hands exchanging secrets. He walked by starlight alone. Every so often, a glimmer of something like fireflies, but slower, heavier, hovered near his shoulder before fading into the dark. The leaves continued their murmurs, but now their voices took on a rhythm, almost like a chant. He couldn't make out words, but the sound settled into his bones like a lullaby. And then the bridge appeared. It rose out of the earth without warning, arched and ancient, made not of stone or wood, but of something in between, a pale, silvery material that shimmered faintly, as though holding moonlight inside its threads. A sign stood before it, carved in weathered wood. Cross with memory still, but leave none behind. Elion stood at its edge, unsure. A wind picked up, colder than before. Not cruel, just old. He stepped forward. Each footfall on the bridge made no sound. Below there was no water, only mist, thick and slow-moving, like sleeping clouds. The bridge stretched on farther than it should have. 10 steps. 20, 50. Still no end in sight. Then the whispers returned, but this time they weren't from the leaves. They came from behind him. "Elion," a voice said, but not the voice of the stranger. This one was softer, familiar. "Elion, come home." He froze. "Do not look back." He took another step, and another. The voices continued, growing louder, more urgent, each one a thread from his past. Friends, the village blacksmith, a girl who once gave him wildflowers, all pulling at him, asking him to return. He gritted his teeth. "No," he whispered, "not yet." With a final step, he passed through an unseen veil. The air warmed. The whispers ceased. And before him stood a grove lit by pale orbs floating in the branches like resting stars. He had crossed. The forest behind him fell silent, and as he looked ahead, he realized the leaves no longer spoke. But something else had begun to, from somewhere deeper, older, waiting in the roots of the world. Chapter 3. The Bridge of Forgotten Names. The grove was silent. Not the silence of sleep or stillness, but the kind of silence that follows a story too old to retell. Elion stood at the edge, watching the orbs drift between branches, pulsing faintly like fireflies caught in a dream. He moved carefully now, as though his steps might wake something beneath the soil. The path ahead was lined with stone markers, each carved with symbols worn down by time, names, perhaps, or prayers. A gentle wind stirred, and for a moment Elion thought he saw shapes flickering at the edge of the light, not creatures but impressions, echoes of footsteps taken long ago. He walked on. The trees here were shorter, their limbs gnarled and bent low to the earth, as if bowing. The air grew heavier, sweeter, filled with the scent of damp leaves and distant rain. There was no moon above, only a faint glow that seemed to rise from the ground itself. At the heart of the grove he found the second bridge. It was different from the first. Wider, flatter, its stone pale as moonbone, and lined with runes that shimmered faintly as he approached. At its center stood a tall, weathered archway through which nothing could be seen, only swirling dark mist. Beside the arch sat a woman. She was wrapped in a shawl of silver thread, her face hidden beneath a hood. In her hands she held a small mirror, perfectly round, polished to a shine. She looked into it as if watching a memory. When Elion drew closer, she spoke without lifting her gaze. "Do you know your name?" He hesitated. "Yes, Elion." She hummed softly. "And do you know all that it means?" He frowned. "It's just a name." "No name is just a name," she said gently. "Yours carries weight, and what you carry will be tested here." She held out the mirror. Look." Elion took it cautiously and peered inside. At first he saw only his reflection, tired eyes, wind-tangled hair, the faint smudge of ash on his cheek. Then the image shifted. He saw himself as a child running through the fields near Brindlewood, then older, lighting candles in the workshop, laughing beside his mother, listening to his grandfather's stories. The moments flashed by, each one sharp, beautiful, painful. Then they began to blur. Faces he couldn't name, places he didn't remember walking, hands reaching toward him, a sky the wrong color, a shadow standing beside him, always beside him. He gasped and nearly dropped the mirror. The woman caught it effortlessly. "This bridge does not test your courage," she said. "It tests your memory. And memory is the root of identity. Without it, the flame cannot know you." Elion swallowed hard. "What happens if I forget?" She didn't answer. Instead, she gestured to the arch. "You may cross, but speak your name aloud with every step. If you stop, or if you lie, you will be forgotten." He nodded slowly and stepped forward. The mist curled around his feet, like breath from the earth. He placed one foot on the bridge. Elion. Another step. Son of Lyra. Another. Born in Brindlewood, in the season of amber leaves. His voice trembled. With a grandfather who told stories, and eyes always watching the sky. The fog deepened. Elion, who lit candles, who dreamed of fire, who followed a whisper. He stopped. The air froze. In the silence, the mist around him pulsed, like it had heard the pause, the hesitation. Then he took a breath. "Elion," he said again. Still Elion. With the final step, he passed through the arch, and the mist broke like thin paper. The world beyond was still, silent, and entirely new. The world beyond the arch felt distant from everything Elion had known, not just in place, but in time. The air was thinner, tinged with the scent of old parchment and cold stone. The ground beneath his feet was smooth and pale, as if the mist itself had hardened into crystal. Here no trees grew. Instead, tall spires of stone rose from the earth, like broken teeth of a forgotten castle. They hummed faintly as he passed, like wind brushing across the strings of a harp buried deep underground. Elion paused to rest near one of the spires, placing a hand against its surface. It was warm, not the warmth of the sun, but of something ancient, as if the stone still remembered being fire. A soft sound caught his ear. It was not birdsong or wind, but the low chime of bells, no louder than breath. He followed the sound and soon came upon a strange grove of crystals, each one shaped like a bellflower, translucent and tall as a man. As the breeze moved through them, they sang. He sat beside them, closing his eyes. For a while he simply listened. The melody was not a song in the way people understood songs. It was something slower, older, a pattern of tones that stirred memory rather than thought. And as he listened, he began to feel it, not a voice, but a presence, a watching. It wasn't frightening, it was curious, gentle, patient. The whispering flame, perhaps, or something close to it. He didn't speak. He knew somehow that words would be too heavy here, too solid. So he let himself be silent and allowed the quiet to wrap around him like a cloak. Then one of the crystal flowers flickered, not with light, but with a vision. In its surface he saw the face of a man he did not know. The man stood at the edge of a battlefield, dust in his hair, a lantern in his hand. Not a weapon, not armor, only the lantern, and a look in his eyes that spoke of grief and fire and choice. Elion leaned closer. More images came, flashes of lives not his own. A child cradling a dying bird beneath a willow. A woman climbing a tower made of wind. A beast of shadow crumbling beneath the weight of a song. None of it made sense, and yet all of it felt right. The last image was a flame, small, quiet, but burning in the center of an endless dark. When it faded, the crystal fell silent again. Elion opened his eyes. The air around him was still. The presence was gone or asleep once more. He rose. No path marked the way forward, but his feet moved without thinking, as though the land had laid its memory inside him. The crystal grove faded behind, and ahead the earth sloped downward, where the outline of hills met the shimmer of twilight. As he walked, he touched his chest lightly. He still remembered his name. He still remembered the stories. And somewhere in that silent understanding, he felt something new. Not strength, not yet, but the shape of it beginning. Chapter 4. The Moonlit Cavern. By the time Elion reached the foot of the hills, night had deepened into something heavier. Not just dark, but ancient. The stars above blinked faintly, like watchers too far away to speak. The land ahead dipped into a hollow, where the grass gave way to stone, and the sky seemed to vanish altogether. There, hidden in the curve of the earth, yawned the mouth of a cavern. Its entrance was narrow, framed by jagged rocks that shimmered faintly in the starlight. The air spilling from it was cool and dry, carrying a scent like ash and memory. He hesitated. There was no sign, no voice, no warning, only a quiet pull, like the pressure behind a thought not yet spoken. Elion stepped forward. Inside, the world changed. The walls of the cavern were smooth and dark, but veins of silver ran through the stone, glowing faintly. Not enough to see clearly, but enough to guide. With each step, the light pulsed in rhythm with his breath, as though the cave recognized him. Deeper he went. Soon, all sound from the outside world disappeared. Even his own footsteps seemed muted, swallowed by the air. He paused once to drink from his flask and found the tea had gone cold. Still he walked. Time slowed. There were no markers in this place, no turns, no crossroads, only a long and winding descent into the earth. It wasn't frightening, not exactly. It felt more like walking into the belly of a sleeping god. Then he saw it. The cavern opened suddenly, revealing a vast chamber lit not by flame or crystal, but by a single shaft of moonlight pouring through a crack high in the ceiling. The beam touched a pool of still water at the chamber's center, and the reflection danced on the walls like ghostlight. Elion stepped closer. The pool was perfectly still, its surface smooth as glass. He knelt beside it and saw not his face, but images, not unlike the ones from the crystal grove. But these were clearer, closer, like dreams he might have had and forgotten. A city with towers of white stone and blue fire at every gate. A child in a snow-covered field, whispering to the wind. A lantern suspended in the air, surrounded by voices that sang without sound. He reached out not to touch the water, but to feel its presence. A vibration, soft, slow, like the first note of a forgotten melody, moved through his hand and up his arm. "You see more than most," said a voice. He turned, startled. A figure stood at the edge of the light, older than any he'd seen before. Not in body, but in presence. Their eyes shimmered like the veins in the stone, and their robe moved as if woven from the shadows of the cave itself. "You carry questions," they said. "But the answers here are not spoken. They are remembered." Elion rose slowly. "What is this place?" "A chamber of reflection," the figure said. "Many have passed through. Few have seen." "Seen what?" The figure gestured to the pool. "Your thread in the tapestry, your place in the pattern." Elion looked back into the water. The image had changed again. Now it showed the forest, the place where he first saw the flicker. Then the stone with the lantern. Then the bridge of mist, each moment trailing into the next, like a line drawn through time. Then the image stilled, the lantern again. But this time it was burning, not orange or red, but blue-white, calm, steady, and alive. The figure stepped beside him. "It remembers you." Elion looked up. "The flame?" The figure nodded once. "You are not ready to reach it, but it is ready to wait." Then they turned, walking into the shadows, until even their outline faded. Elion stood in silence for a long time, watching the pool, watching the moonlight dance. Then, quietly, he whispered, "I will find you." The cave did not answer, but something in the stone seemed to pulse once gently, as if to say, "I know." The moonlight dimmed as clouds passed above the distant crack in the stone. The shimmer on the water stilled, and the visions beneath it faded, returning the surface to ordinary reflection. Elion stepped back from the pool. The silence pressed closer now, not cold, but vast, like standing at the edge of something immeasurable. A narrow passage opened at the far side of the chamber, almost hidden behind a pillar of rock. No light marked it, yet Elion knew this was the way forward. Not because of signs, but because there were none. The stories always said the real paths were the ones found in silence. He lit a small candle from his satchel, one of the few he'd brought from Brindlewood. It flickered to life, casting a gentle glow on the walls around him. The flame was simple, steady, and somehow comforting. With it he entered the dark. The tunnel beyond sloped upward now, winding slowly like the inside of a spiral shell. The air grew warmer, the walls narrower. Once or twice he had to stoop low and feel his way forward by touch alone. The candle's light barely reached an arm's length ahead. He wondered how long it had been since he'd spoken aloud. He wondered if his voice still remembered the shape of words. Finally, the tunnel widened into a smaller chamber, not grand like the last, but still carved by purpose. At its center was a stone bench, and above it a marking on the wall, a circle within a flame, drawn with something that shimmered faintly red. Elion sat. His legs ached now. His shoulders were heavy. The silence felt heavier still. He took the candle from his hand and placed it on the floor before him. Its light trembled. He closed his eyes. Here, in the deep quiet, thoughts came more slowly, not in words, but in images, in feelings. He saw the village. His mother tying dried herbs to a string. The candlemaker's shop, warm and cluttered. His grandfather sitting by the hearth, telling the story of the flame with that glint in his eye. He saw them all as if through a veil, not far, but unreachable. He thought of turning back. The idea came like a whisper from within. There's still time. You could return. You've seen wonders enough for one life. But with that thought came another. You have not yet heard what the flame would say. He opened his eyes again. The candle burned low now, its wax pooled at the base. The mark on the wall shimmered again. only for a moment, and the air stirred faintly, as if in response. No vision followed, no voice, just warmth. A quiet warmth that said, "You are still on the path." And that is enough. Elion stood once more, slower this time. Tired, yes, but no longer uncertain. He left the candle burning. Let it light the silence for whoever might come next. And then he stepped into the narrow corridor beyond, deeper into the unknown. Not with fear, nor with hope alone, but with the quiet resolve of one who walks not to find answers, but to remember who he is becoming. Chapter 5. The Silent Watcher. The corridor twisted and narrowed, then rose in a gentle slope until, at last, Elion stepped once more beneath open sky. He emerged onto a rocky ledge, overlooking a vast valley bathed in moonlight. The horizon stretched wide, silver and silent, with distant shapes that might have been mountains or the bones of something long forgotten. A single tree stood near the edge of the cliff, gnarled, leafless, yet alive in its stillness. Beneath it a fire crackled gently, its flames low and steady. Not blue, not white, just simple orange fire, like the kind he knew from home. And beside it sat a figure. They were tall, wrapped in a dark cloak that shimmered faintly with the stars above. Their face was not hidden, yet Elion could not see it clearly, only that it was calm, untroubled, and impossibly old. The figure did not move when Elion approached, did not speak. So Elion sat down on the other side of the fire, saying nothing at first. They listened to the wind together. After a long while, the figure turned slightly. Their eyes, gray, endless, met his. "You have walked far," they said, not as a question, but a recognition. Elion nodded. "Farther than I knew I could." The figure looked back to the fire. "And what did you seek when you left?" Elion hesitated. A flame, a whisper, a truth. The figure nodded. "And now?" "I'm not sure," Elion said honestly. I seek the part of me that believes it's still out there." The fire cracked. "That part," the figure said softly, "is the only one that matters." Elion felt his shoulders ease, his breath slow. The warmth from the fire reached deeper than it should have, not just into his skin, but into the places that had grown cold from doubt. "Are you the flame?" he asked quietly. The figure smiled, gently, almost sadly. "No, I am only the one who waits, the one who watches." "For what?" "For those who choose to keep going." The firelight flickered in Elion's eyes. "Have many passed this way?" "A few," the watcher replied. "Some turned back. Some went on." Elion watched the flames dance. "Do they all find it?" "The flame?" "No," the watcher said, "but those who truly listen." "Find what they need." They sat in silence again, and the fire burned low. Above, a few stars slipped behind clouds as though retreating into sleep. Elion looked across the valley toward the shadowy horizon. "There's more ahead, isn't there?" "Yes," the watcher said. "Always more. Will I be alone?" The watcher reached toward the fire, and with a movement barely visible, added a small piece of wood. The flames flared up gently, and a new warmth spread. Only in the way, every path must be walked alone, but never in the way that matters. Elion closed his eyes. In the crackle of fire, he heard his grandfather's voice, not in words, but in the way silence carried meaning. When he opened his eyes again, the watcher was gone. Only the fire remained. Elion sat a while longer, watching it burn. Then, as dawn began to stretch thin fingers across the sky, He stood. He took nothing from the fire. He left no mark behind. Only footprints and a steady breath, and the silence of someone who now knew that being watched was not the same as being alone. And the path continued forward. The path beyond the fire curved downward into the valley, where the world was still painted in soft grays and pale blues. Dawn had not yet fully arrived, only the whisper of it. That in-between hour when the night still clings to the earth and the morning is only a promise. Elion walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because something inside him had changed. The rush to reach, to find, to prove it had quieted. What remained was a kind of listening. The road beneath his feet was lined with stones covered in moss. Some bore markings, though most were too worn to read. Every so often he would see a sign that someone had passed this way before, a carved symbol on a tree, a feather tied to a low branch, a broken twig placed with intention. He wasn't the first. That thought comforted him. A soft breeze moved through the grass, bringing with it the scent of distant rain and something else, smoke, faint and clean, like from a newly lit hearth. It reminded him of home. He stopped for a moment, closing his eyes. He imagined Brindlewood, quiet beneath morning mist, his mother stirring the fire, the sound of goats in the fields, the way the roof creaked when it rained. He let the image linger, not as longing, but as anchoring, a thread tied gently to who he had been. And then he let it go. The landscape ahead was different now, more open, but scattered with strange shapes. Half-buried structures of stone, circular platforms overgrown with grass, fragments of ancient walls. Not ruins of cities, but of ideas, places where people once believed in something deeply, then moved on. He paused at one such platform. At its center stood a column, cracked but still upright. Around its base, small objects had been left. A smooth stone, a bird skull, a folded piece of cloth. Offerings, perhaps, or memories. Elion placed his hand on the column. The stone was cold, but steady. He whispered, "I see you." The words were not for the stone, not even for the place, but for something within himself, the part that had begun to look at the world with eyes no longer only searching, but receiving. He moved on. As the sky lightened, colors returned, the soft green of moss, the blush of dawn across distant peaks, the golden shimmer in dew-soaked grass. Everything seemed quiet, but not empty. There was presence in the silence, purpose. By the time the sun crested the hills, Elion had reached a low ridge, overlooking the valley he had just crossed. He turned to look back, not with doubt, not with regret, but with reverence. Each step he had taken now lay behind him, not as a line, but as a story, one that was still being written, one that no longer needed to prove itself. He turned forward once more, and as the first full light of morning touched the path ahead, he stepped into it with quiet feet, a steady heart, and the whisper of fire still alive somewhere inside him. Chapter 6. The Storm on the Ridge. By midday the path turned from soft earth to stone, and the valley gave way to rising hills. They were no longer gentle or green, but jagged, pale, wind-scoured. The grass disappeared. The sky darkened, not with night, but with the slow build of a storm. Elion climbed steadily. The incline was steep, the wind sharp. Clouds rolled low across the sky like restless beasts. The air felt charged, alive with quiet electricity. The kind that made your fingers tingle and your heart beat a little faster? He wrapped his cloak tighter and pressed forward. The trail narrowed along a ridge, a single path carved through weathered rock. On either side, the ground dropped steeply into mist, deep valleys hidden below layers of cloud. There was no sound but wind and the occasional groan of shifting stone. Then the rain began, not sudden, not violent, just the first soft drops, like fingers testing the edges of his resolve. They clung to his hair, his hands, his eyes, and still he climbed. Thunder rumbled far off. The wind grew stronger. He reached a bend in the ridge and ducked beneath a crooked outcrop of stone. It wasn't much shelter, but it broke the worst of the gusts. There he rested, breathing heavily, watching the storm gather. Lightning flashed in the distance, white and wide, and then, as if drawn by the light, a voice called out, "Hey!" Elion turned sharply. Farther up the ridge, through the curtain of rain, a figure stumbled into view, half collapsed, clutching their side. They fell to their knees with a groan. Without thinking, Elion ran toward them, boots sliding on the slick stone. The figure was young, not much older than him, with short, dark hair and a gash across their arm. They looked up as Elion approached, their face pale and weary. "You're real," the stranger breathed. "I thought the mountain was playing tricks again." Elion helped them sit back against the rock. "What happened?" The stranger laughed weakly. "Wind happened. Stone happened. I wasn't watching my step." They winced as Elion tore a strip from his sleeve and wrapped it around the wound. "Thank you," they murmured. "Didn't think anyone else walked this path." "I didn't either," Elion said. They sat together beneath the rock as the storm thickened, thunder now closer, sharper. The stranger pulled their cloak tighter, shivering. "I'm Kale," they said. "Elion." Kale nodded. "You going to the flame?" Elion looked at them surprised. "You know about it?" Kale smiled faintly. Why else would anyone come this far? Lightning split the sky, and for a moment everything was white. Then darkness again. The wind howled louder now, but inside that narrow space beneath the ridge they were still. Breathing, warm enough. Kale closed their eyes. "You ever think maybe the flame's not a thing you find? Maybe it's something that finds you?" Elion said nothing, but the words stayed with him. The storm raged on. But for now, there were two of them, and the fire, though distant, felt a little closer. They waited beneath the ridge for what felt like hours. The storm came in waves, sometimes soft and rhythmic like a lullaby sung in thunder, other times sharp and howling, trying to peel the mountain apart. But eventually it began to fade. The wind slowed. The rain softened. And the sky, though still gray, showed hints of brightness around its edges, a promise of calm. Kale stirred first. "I think we can move," they said, their voice hoarse but steady. Elion nodded. Together they climbed from beneath the shelter and stepped once more onto the path. The air smelled fresh now, like wet stone and pine bark. Mist rose from the earth in curling tendrils, and droplets clung to every blade of mountain grass like tiny mirrors. Kale limped slightly, but did not complain. They walked in silence for a time, the storm fading behind them, the ridge winding ahead in long, sloping lines. Below, valleys revealed themselves between the clouds, deep green pockets of untouched land, scattered with the bones of old towers and forgotten trails. Elion stole a glance at Kale. Their eyes were sharp, observant, not just someone who had wandered here by chance, but someone who had lost something or was trying to find it again. "Have you been walking long?" Elion asked. Cale shrugged. "Hard to say, days blur together out here. You follow one sign, then another. Then you realize the signs were for someone else. But you kept going." Cale looked at him with a tired smile. Didn't know how to stop. Elion understood that. They reached a narrow pass, where the path dipped into a small hollow sheltered from the wind. There, a circle of stones marked what had once been a fire pit. Elion gathered what dry twigs he could find beneath a crooked tree, and Cale struck a spark from flint. The fire caught slowly. They sat close to it, cloaks wrapped tight, letting the warmth soak in. For a while they didn't speak. Only the fire did, soft cracks and low sighs like it was breathing with them. Eventually Cale broke the silence. "You think the flame we're chasing is real?" Elion thought about it. "I think. If it's not, something else is. Something worth following." Cale nodded. "I used to believe things like that. And now," Cale tossed a twig into the fire, "now I'm hoping to remember how." The flames flickered higher. Above them the clouds parted just enough for stars to shine through, faint and few, but enough to remind them that the sky was still there, that light could return even after storms. They didn't make plans. They didn't speak of what would come next. But when they rose the next morning, packed their things, and turned back toward the path, they walked side by side, not fast, not urgent, but together. And somewhere deep in the quiet of the mountain, something old watched them go and was pleased. Chapter 7. The City Beneath the Ashes. They descended into the valley at first light, the path sloping wide between crumbling cliffs and leaning pillars of stone. The air here felt heavier, not from moisture or wind, but from memory, the kind that clings to places long after names have been forgotten. No birds sang, no trees grew, only stone and silence. Elion and Cale stepped carefully across cracked paving stones, half buried under dust and ash. The remains of walls and columns jutted from the earth like the ribs of a sleeping giant. Here and there, doorways still stood, leading into nothing. Time had taken the roofs, the floors, the people, but not the presence. This was a city, Cale said softly, running a hand along the etched edge of a fallen gate. Elion nodded. Not built for defense. No, built for remembering. They'd passed a well at the heart of what might have once been a square. Its stones were blackened, and ivy twisted up its sides. Carvings covered every surface, not words, but shapes. Spirals, eyes, open hands, lanterns, everywhere. Elion knelt beside one of the carvings. He traced it slowly with a fingertip. "The whispering flame," he murmured. Cale crouched beside him. "They built this place around it, or beneath it," Elion said. They moved through the ruins without speaking, as though voices might disturb something sacred. In some places the ash grew thick, layering the stones like snowfall. It didn't cling to their boots or their cloaks. It was dry, ancient, undisturbed for what felt like centuries. In the shadow of a broken tower, they found a series of shallow steps that led downward into darkness. They lit a lantern. Elion carried it. Its glow illuminated a narrow corridor carved into the rock, walls lined with worn tiles, each bearing symbols that glinted faintly in the flickering light. The further they went, the cooler the air became. as though descending into the memory of winter. At last, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling had long since collapsed in places, allowing slivers of daylight to spill through. Dust danced in the light, suspended like tiny spirits. Stone benches lined the walls, and at the chamber's center stood an altar, low, wide, and blackened with soot. Elion approached. Upon the altar sat a lantern. It was cracked, empty, cold. He reached out, touched its side, and visions bloomed behind his eyes. He saw a gathering robed figures seated in a circle, hands raised. He saw flames dancing in the air, floating like birds. He saw the same lantern, whole and blazing, held aloft in a ritual of silence, and he saw it fall, crash, darken. A long, slow sigh filled the space, not from the air, but from something deeper. Elion stepped back, heart pounding. Kale steadied him. "What did you see?" "Memories," Elion whispered. "Not mine." They sat together on the stone floor, backs against the cool wall, the lantern placed carefully between them. Outside, the world continued in silence, the ruins watching, listening. "Why do you think it went out?" Kale asked at last. Elion shook his head. "Maybe it was never meant to last forever. Maybe it needs to be relit." Kale looked at him with quiet eyes. "Then we'll find the spark." And in that moment, in the stillness of a broken city and the glow of a quiet lantern, something shifted in the air. A breath, a tremble. Not quite magic, but something near it. They remained in the chamber until the lantern's light dimmed to a soft glow, then gathered their things and continued deeper into the ruins. The underground passages were many, winding corridors, broken stairwells, open chambers filled with debris and silence. Sometimes they passed carvings on the walls, figures with raised hands, eyes drawn without pupils, symbols that repeated again and again, circles within circles, lanterns within flame. "This place wasn't built for the living," Kale murmured. Elion agreed. It was built for remembering. As they moved through the stone maze, time seemed to stretch. There were no windows, no shifts in light, only the flicker of their lantern casting shadows along the walls. Their footsteps echoed faintly behind them, but never ahead, as though the path waited until each step was chosen. Eventually, they reached a wide hall, mostly collapsed. Only part of the ceiling remained, supported by thick stone arches. Beneath it, a long table had once stood, though now it was just a line of rubble and scorched wood. Around it, broken chairs, shattered dishes, the remains of something once ceremonial. And at the far end, untouched by debris, stood a statue. It was simple. A robed figure, arms extended, holding a flame in both palms. Its face was worn smooth by time, but its posture spoke clearly. "Welcome." Kale moved toward it and paused. "There's something in its hand." Elion approached carefully. Resting atop the stone flame was a small shard of glass, round-edged, almost clear. When he picked it up, it pulsed faintly in his fingers, warm despite the cool air. "What is it?" Kale asked. Elion stared at it. "I think it's part of the flame." The shard pulsed again. A soft wind stirred the dust at their feet, not from outside, from inside, as if the very breath of the runes had quickened. Kale stepped back. "Do you feel that?" Elion nodded slowly. The silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was listening. He slipped the shard into the pocket of his cloak, cradling it gently, and for a moment you felt the memory of the lantern again, burning not with heat, but with stillness, with presence. They left the chamber without speaking, moving once more into the shadows. Behind them the statue remained, arms outstretched, holding an invisible flame. As they climbed the broken stairs toward the surface, a beam of light pierced through a crack in the ceiling, striking the empty altar far below. The dust caught it like mist, and there, for the briefest moment, a flicker danced in the air, a whisper of flame. Then it was gone, but something had changed. Above ground, the wind had shifted, and the path forward, once hidden, now waited. Chapter 8. The Lantern of Eldara. The path ahead was different now. It was not marked by stones or signs, not carved into the mountain or etched into the earth. It was simply there, unfolding with each step, as though the land had been waiting for them all along. Elion and Kale moved through a wide, open stretch of highland. The wind was soft. The light was strange, not morning, not evening, but a kind of silver dusk that lingered no matter the hour. In the distance rose a single peak, not the tallest, not the sharpest, but quiet. And at its summit they could just make out a faint glow, steady, unmoving, like the memory of a star. "That's it," Kale said. Elion nodded. They walked. No more ruins, no more symbols, only grass, stone, and silence. But the silence was no longer empty. It hummed with a presence just beyond hearing, the kind of silence that came before a story ended, or just as it began again. As they climbed, the shard in Elion's pocket grew warmer. Not hot, just enough to remind him it was there, alive, waiting. Halfway up the mountain, the sky began to shift, not with clouds or storm, but with texture, as though the air itself had grown denser, richer. The light moved differently here, slower, shadows deepened and softened at once. The world lost its edges. Kale stopped. "Elion," they said quietly, "I don't think I'm meant to go further." Elion turned to them. "What do you mean?" Kale smiled, but it was a tired old smile, not sad, only certain. "This is your path," they said. "I was here to walk beside you for part of it. But now?" They looked toward the peak. "Now something waits for you." Elion wanted to argue, but deep inside he knew. He reached into his cloak and pulled out the shard. It pulsed faintly in his palm. "Take it," Kale said. "It belongs to your story now." Elion nodded. They embraced, no words left between them, only warmth, only gratitude. Kale stepped back and sat on a flat stone, watching the sky, watching Elion go, and Elion climbed alone. The peak was not far, but each step felt heavier, not with doubt, but with weight, as if the world itself leaned in now, watching, listening. When he reached the top, he found a circle of stones. At its center stood a pedestal of smooth obsidian, and upon it a lantern. It was small, unassuming, old. Its glass was cracked, its frame tarnished, but something within it stirred, like breath behind glass. Elion stepped forward. The shard in his hand pulsed one last time, then stilled. He placed it into the lantern. The silence grew complete, and then softly, slowly, the flame came, not as a flash nor a roar, but a whisper of light, pale, blue-white, gentle as the first snow, as the last dream before waking. It filled the lantern, curling into every corner, and then it spoke, not in words, but in presence. It showed him the path behind, the steps taken, the truths faced, the fears held and released. It showed him the faces of those who waited and those who had gone. It showed him not the future, but the shape of becoming. And it asked one question, a question without voice, but clear. Will you carry this? Elion placed his hands around the lantern and whispered, yes. The flame pulsed once, and the mountain exhaled. Chapter 9. The Return and the Fire. Elion descended slowly. The lantern burned in his hands, steady and silent. Its light was not bright. It didn't cut through the dark or blind the stars. It glowed like memory, like still water, like a secret kept between old friends. The world below looked different now. The highlands stretched out like open pages. The sky had softened into a velvet dusk. Wind moved gently through the grass, and with each breath, the land seemed to welcome him back, not because he had conquered anything, but because he had listened. He returned the way he had come, through ruins hushed in reverence, past the cliff where the fire once burned beneath the gnarled tree, down into the folds of the forest where the leaves still whispered, though now their voices seemed clearer, less like riddles, more like songs. He did not hurry. At the edge of the trees where the path first began, he stopped. Brindlewood lay just beyond the hills, quiet and distant. But Elion did not enter the village. Not yet. Instead, he sat upon the old stone bench where he once watched the forest and dreamed of stories too large for his hands. The lantern rested beside him. Its flame flickered slowly as though breathing in time with the world. And from the trees they came, not many, just a few. A child, barefoot and wide-eyed, an old man with a walking stick, blinking as though in a dream, a woman with soil on her hands, still smelling of rosemary. They said nothing. They simply sat, and Elion understood. The flame was never meant for him alone. It was meant to be seen, to be shared. So he opened the lantern, and the light rose, not like fire, but like warmth, like song, like story. It flowed through the clearing, wrapping around each person gently. No one gasped, no one ran. They simply breathed it in and remembered something they didn't know they had forgotten: hope, stillness, the part of themselves that had once listened to wind and trees and believed it was speaking. As the night deepened, more people came, not to witness a miracle, but to sit quietly together near a fire that did not burn, but healed. And when the flame dimmed and the lantern closed, Elion lay down beside it, the earth warm beneath him, the stars wide above. He did not sleep. He dreamed awake. And somewhere far away a story ended, or maybe began.